What if the most powerful country in the world told your tiny nation to back off, and you looked them dead in the eye and said no? That's exactly what Singapore did. A city-state smaller than London, with no army worth fearing, no nuclear weapons, no permanent seat at the United Nations, went head-to-head with Beijing. And not once, not twice, but repeatedly, across decades, over issues China considers non-negotiable. And here's the part nobody talks about. Singapore didn't just survive, it thrived. To understand why this matters, you need to understand what Singapore actually is. Imagine a country with no natural resources, no oil, no farmland, no rivers, a population of just 6 million people, less than Hong Kong. It sits at the tip of the Malay Peninsula, surrounded by much larger, sometimes hostile neighbors. By every traditional measure, Singapore should be a pawn, a small piece moved around the board by bigger players. And yet, Singapore has consistently ranked among the top 5 wealthiest nations on Earth by GDP per capita. It has built one of the world's most efficient ports, most trusted financial systems, and most strategically important air hubs, all while balancing relationships with China, the United States, and the rest of Southeast Asia simultaneously. This isn't luck. This is strategy, cold, calculated, unapologetic strategy. And the man who built it from the ground up was Kuan Yew, Singapore's founding father, who governed from 1959 to 1990 and shaped the country's foreign policy DNA for generations to come. His philosophy was simple. Small nations don't survive by being liked. They survive by being useful and being unpredictable. Now here's where the story gets dangerous. China has always had an expectation, call it an unspoken rule, when it comes to Singapore. You see, Singapore is approximately 74% ethnically Chinese. Its founders spoke Mandarin. Its culture is deeply rooted in Chinese tradition. So from Beijing's perspective, Singapore should naturally orbit China's sphere of influence. It should nod along when China speaks. It should stay quiet when Beijing acts. Singapore refused. The first major flashpoint came during the South China Sea dispute. China began its now famous island-building campaign in the early 2010s, constructing artificial islands in contested waters, militarizing them, and essentially claiming vast stretches of international sea lanes as China's territory. Most of Southeast Asia stayed quiet. They were too afraid, too economically dependent, too small to push back. But Singapore did something extraordinary. It didn't just stay quiet. It publicly supported the 2016 ruling by the Permanent Court of Arbitration that went against China's claims. Beijing was furious. Chinese state media unleashed a wave of editorials attacking Singapore. One article in Global Times, China's government tablet, told Singapore to watch out and warned it was making itself an adversary of China. Another called Singapore a running dog of the United States. These are mild diplomatic signals. In the language of geopolitics, this is a warning shot. China was telling Singapore, fall in line or face consequences. And then things escalated in a way nobody expected. In November 2016, 9 Singaporean military vehicles, armored personnel carriers, were intercepted and seized by Hong Kong customs while being transported back from training exercises in Taiwan. Let that sink in. Singapore's military equipment in international transit was confiscated. This was not an accident. The timing was unmistakable. It happened weeks after Singapore's Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong had reaffirmed support for international law in the South China Sea. The message from Beijing was crystal clear. We can reach you anywhere. For 2 months, the vehicles sat in Hong Kong. Singapore's government demanded their return. There were diplomatic back channels, quiet negotiations, tense silences. The world watched to see if Singapore would win. But why did Singapore care so much about Taiwan in the first place? Here's the twist that most people miss. Singapore has been conducting military training in Taiwan since the 1970s under a secret arrangement called Starlight. Why Taiwan? Because in the 1960s, when Singapore was newly independent and building its military from scratch, no neighboring country would allow Singapore to train troops on their soil. They feared a capable Singaporean military. Taiwan said this. It was a relationship built on mutual vulnerability, and Singapore never abandoned it. Even as Taiwan became one of the most politically sensitive topics on something that rewrote the playbook for small nations everywhere. It didn't apologize, it didn't back down, and it didn't pick a fight. Instead, it executed a strategy so precise, so disciplined, that it left Beijing with almost no leverage to pull. First, Singapore's government went public, carefully. Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong gave measured, diplomatic statements making clear that Singapore operates under international law and expects its military equipment to be returned. No hysteria, no threats, just calm, public positioning that made it politically costly for China to continue building the vehicles without appearing to be a bully on the world stage. Second, and this is the genius part, Singapore activated its network. Singapore had spent decades cultivating relationships with every major power simultaneously. It hosts the U.S. Pacific Fleet's logistics operations. It maintains deep trade ties with Japan, Australia, and the European Union. It has quietly built itself into a hub that everyone depends on. When Singapore spoke, Washington listened. When Singapore was threatened, the entire financial architecture of Southeast Asia froze. Third, Singapore made an economic argument that China couldn't make. More than 3,000 Chinese companies have regional headquarters in Singapore. Over $60 billion in Chinese investment flows through Singapore's financial system. Singapore is China's largest foreign investment destination in Southeast Asia. Punishing Singapore too will severely make punishing Chinese businesses. Beijing had built its own trap. After 2 months, too long, hence months, Hong Kong authorities released the 9 armored vehicles. Singapore got them back. No formal apology, no dramatic ceremony, but the message was unmistakable. Singapore had stood firm, and China had backed down. But the story doesn't end there, because what Singapore did after the crisis is just as important as surviving it. Singapore doubled down on its principle of what it calls strategic autonomy. This is the idea that a small state must never allow itself to become so dependent on any single power that it loses the ability to say no. Singapore began quietly expanding its military. It now has one of the most advanced air forces in Asia, operating F-15SGs and soon F-35s. It deepened its defense cooperation with the United States, signing a new memorandum that extended American access to Singaporean military facilities. And simultaneously, it kept doing business with China at record levels, signing onto China's Belt and Road Initiative in selected areas, inviting Chinese tech investment, and maintaining Premier Lee's regular meetings with Chinese leadership. This is the dance Singapore mastered, the indispensable to everyone, beholden to no one, and the world began to notice. When the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, struggled to produce a unified statement on the South China Sea because China had pressured Cambodia and Laos to block it, it was Singapore that quietly worked behind the scenes to forge language that acknowledged international law without triggering diplomatic explosion. Singapore became the translator between East and West, between old power and new power, between the American order and the rising Chinese world. So what happened in the end? What does Singapore look like today, after years of walking this impossible tightrope? The results are almost hard to believe. Singapore's trade with China grew after the armored vehicle crisis, not despite the confrontation, but in a way that suggests respect was a prerequisite for the relationship. China came to understand that Singapore's reliability as a partner depended on Singapore being independent. A Singapore that simply said yes to Beijing would be worthless as a diplomatic partner, worthless as a financial hub, worthless as a neutral ground for negotiations. Singapore also emerged as one of the key venues for the most sensitive diplomatic meetings on Earth. In 2018, the historic summit between U.S. President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un was held in Singapore. Think about that. When the world needed a neutral, trusted, stable ground to negotiate between two nuclear-armed adversaries, they chose this tiny city-state that had defied China and stayed friends with America simultaneously. That's not a coincidence. That's a reputation built over decades, paying dividends. On the economic side, Singapore's GDP per capita today hovers around $65,000 US, among the top 5 in the world, ahead of Germany, Japan, and the United Kingdom. It has maintained one of the world's highest credit ratings, in AAA grade from S&P and Moody's. Its port remains one of the 2 busiest in the world. Its Changi airport has been voted the world's best for years running. None of this happened by accident. And here's the detail that should stop you cold. Singapore's reserves, the money its government has saved and invested, are estimated to be over $700 billion. For a country of 6 million people, that is over $100,000 per citizen. This is a nation that has prepared for every scenario, including economic warfare, because it knows that in a world where giants clash, small nations need an extraordinary cushion. China, for its part, has recalibrated. Singapore continues to speak honestly in multilateral forums about international law and freedom of navigation. China continues to invest in Singapore and use it as a key financial gateway. The relationship is not warm in the way that China's relationships with, say, Pakistan or Cambodia are warm. It is functional, professional, and based on mutual benefit rather than political loyalty. And that, paradoxically, makes it more durable. So what can the world actually learn from this? The Singapore model challenges one of the most dangerous assumptions in modern geopolitics, that small, weak nations must choose a side, that you're either with the Americans or with the Chinese. That survival means submission. Singapore proved that the opposite can be true. Weakness, when managed with extraordinary discipline and intelligence, can become a kind of strength. Because when you have nothing to lose, everything to gain by playing it smart, you develop capabilities that bigger powers never bothered to build. Singapore built institutions that function, genuinely, not just on paper. It built a legal system so transparent that global companies trust it with their most sensitive contracts. It built a government so uncorrupt by global comparison that international arbitration bodies base their operations there. It made itself the place where the rules of the international order actually apply, at a time when those rules were being rewritten everywhere else. The deeper lesson is about the power of being necessary. Singapore didn't make itself safe by being harmless. It made itself safe by making sure that its destruction would hurt everyone. When China pressures Singapore, it also pressures Chinese companies headquartered there. When the U.S. ignores Singapore's interests, it risks its own Pacific logistics network. Singapore built a web of interdependencies so complex that removing it from the system creates chaos for everyone. This is the model that dozens of small nations, from the Baltic states to Gulf monarchies to Pacific island nations now facing Chinese pressure, are quietly studying. How do you say no to a superpower without getting crushed? You make the cost of crushing you higher than the cost of respecting you. Kuan Yew said it best. These words have echoed through every Singapore foreign policy decision since. We are not a small country trying to punch above our weight. We are a small country that has decided exactly what it's worth and made sure the world agrees. Singapore isn't perfect. Its political system is far from a Western-style democracy. Its press freedom rankings are poor. Its government maintains tight control over public discourse. These are real criticisms. But in the arena of geopolitics, in the raw, unforgiving game of national survival, Singapore has written a masterclass that no textbook captures. The question isn't whether you admire Singapore. The question is whether you're paying attention. China warned Singapore. Singapore built a trap, and China walked right into it. This is what geopolitics looks like when intelligence replaces military might. And this story isn't over. As U.S.-China tensions rise across the Taiwan Strait, Singapore will once again be the place where the world watches to see if the rules still hold. If you want to understand how the world actually works, not the textbook version, but the real version, hit subscribe. We cover these stories every week. And if this video made you think differently about power, share it with someone who still believes only big countries matter. Because history keeps proving them wrong.